Sultan Sanctuary is an interesting game that is commonly referred to as a 2D Dark Souls, which it is, but this simple descriptor doesn't account for the number of ways that make it vastly different from Dark Souls. And no, I don't just mean the fact that it's 2D. The first major difference you'll come across is the wounding and fatigue mechanics. The more your stamina and health bars get depleted, the lower their maximum values become. This is reset by resting at a shrine or sanctuary. Let me give an example. Let's say you have 100 points of stamina and a roll costs 25 points of stamina. So when you roll, you will have 75 points of stamina, which regenerates because it's stamina. But when it regenerates, it'll only regenerate to 99 points of stamina. So when you roll this time, you'll have 74 points of stamina, which will then regenerate to only 98 this time. Do you get what I mean? The same thing goes for health, only health doesn't regenerate by itself. So the longer a fight progresses, the more you have to manage your resources, which I like the concept of, but in practice it can get to the point where you spend more time waiting for your stamina to return than you do actually attacking. Something I have to praise this game for is the level design. At first the game feels very linear, but later on it opens up and you'll find ways back to places you've been before that allow you to go from a sanctuary in an earlier part of the game to an area much later on. There are also certain abilities that you unlock later that allow you to open up entirely new areas and find cool treasures or creeds that you couldn't obtain before. Creeds are this game's versions of covenants, which allow you to trade certain enemy drops to level up in said creed. This gives you access to a consumable that is replenished at any sanctuary owned by that creed. These consumables include health potions, potions that reverse the effects of fatigue, weapon buffs, and other things depending on the creed. Also, you can obtain buffs from sanctuaries depending on the type of NPC you have there. For example, having a merchant at your sanctuary increases your item find, and a mage gives you increased potency for spells and incantations. Speaking of which, magic in Sultan Sanctuary is treated quite differently than in Dark Souls. If you use a wand, you can equip one spell that you activate using L2. If you use a staff, then you can equip two spells that you can activate using square and triangle. As for incantations, you have the entire bottom row of the equipment screen, which means a total of 8 incantations that you cycle through your hotbar to select and then activate with R1. With incantations you don't need a wand nor a staff, just the right level of magic. And stamina, because magic uses stamina. Well, technically focus, which is the small white bar below your stamina. However, consuming focus consumes an equivalent amount of fatigue. Part of me wants to praise this kind of risk and reward, but I'd rather it be in the form of less life or defense. A glass cannon in essence, which you can't do because for some reason you cannot level up without increasing your life. So no matter what build you run, you will always have the same amount of life as someone else as long as they are of the same level as you. Want to make a glass cannon like I did? No can do. Want to gouge life to become an immovable object? Why would you want to do that, says the game. Another consequence of this is that because your life can't be upgraded that much, bosses don't do insane damage in late game. I have done a no leveling run in this game, and some of the late game bosses were only two-shotting me. And what armor was I wearing? Blacksmith gloves. Nothing else. And yet end game bosses were doing similar damage to me as early game bosses. I don't agree with this. If I haven't increased my life and I'm wearing next to no armor, then a two-shot should be very rare if non-existent. And a side note on the no leveling thing. I wanted to do a playthrough where I didn't upgrade my life at all, just for a little extra challenge. But because of how this game works, that meant that I wasn't allowed to level up at all, which severely restricted my options for combat. But aside from not being able to level up your life separately from anything else, what is build diversity like? It's actually pretty decent, and I think that part of the reason why is because you can spend grey pearls that you find in the game to remove points you've spent and get back spent black pearls that you earn by leveling up to be able to spend elsewhere. It allows you to grow your skill tree just a little bit faster. I like it. I like the option to be able to min-max my stats, even if it's just a little. Now, it's rare that I actually do this, but nonetheless, it's nice that the potential is there. The enemy diversity is also pretty good, as you'll be running into new enemy types in nearly every single new area, some of which are a lot of fun to fight, whilst others not so much. Grave Walker. And the same can be said for the bosses, which are very diverse and very pattern-based, which often results in a case where once you know the pattern, you can beat the boss. But then some bosses are very strange with their AI, which makes them very awkward to fight. So when the bosses are done well, they're amazing. But when they're not, they're pretty obnoxious. Thankfully, the bad bosses are few and far between. So I've just realised that I've gotten this far into the review, and I haven't even mentioned my biggest gripe with the game. Weapon diversity. Yes, there are a lot of weapons in the game, however, unless they have vertical slashes, they're unfortunately not that useful. You see, in a 3D game such as Dark Souls, horizontal slashes are useful because they're easier to aim and you can hit multiple opponents. And thrusting weapons are useful because you're less likely to hit a wall if you're fighting in a narrow corridor, for example. However, once you remove the narrow corridors and the Z-axis, then you also remove the utility of horizontal swinging weapons and thrusting attacks. You see, a 2D plane only has two axes, X and Y, whereas a 3D plane, you have three axes, X, Y, and Z. Thrusting attacks attack mostly in the X axes, horizontal slashes the Z, and vertical the Y. And like I said earlier, Salt and Sanctuary doesn't have a Z-axis, which essentially means that all horizontal slashes serve the same purpose as thrusting attacks, to attack in the X-axis. But then there's a lot of flying enemies in the game, so without a weapon that attacks in the Y-axis, taking them out can be more than just a challenge. And, well, vertical swinging weapons can hit in the X-axis too. So vertical swinging weapons are just the best because they can do everything that you need them to. And what weapon does this best? The Greatsword class. It has great range, great speed, and great damage. It completely outshines every other class of weapon in the entire game. It's really a shame because there are a lot of interesting weapons in the game. Something I almost forgot to mention is the platforming, which is kind of a significant part of this game. Is not actually that good because unfortunately it's somewhat dictated by your weight. So say if you wear heavy armor, you're going to have a much harder time doing platforming because you're not going to be able to jump as far as if you would if you had light armor. And that sucks. I've done a couple attempted heavy armor playthroughs, and for any sort of platforming section, I've had to remove the armor just to make it viable for me to be able to platform. Because otherwise, I will jump, I will fail to grab the ledge because I won't have jumped far enough, and I'll plummet to my death. Not a good point considering that this is a platformer in essence. But all in all, would I recommend this game? Hell yes. For the price tag, there is so much content that if you're a Souls fan, you owe it to yourself to at least try it out. It's easy to lose yourself in the world, and the bosses are so much fun, with a few exceptions, that you'll keep wanting more. And the story is minimal, so if you don't care for it, then you can just ignore it, but if you do care for it, there's plenty of tidbits in item description and dialogue that keep you intrigued and keep you questioning what's actually going on. Again, it's kind of similar to Dark Souls in that regard, but then Salt and Sanctuary doesn't shy away from its Dark Souls influence. In fact, it wears it on its shoulders, but it also changes things up quite a bit to create something familiar, yet completely unfamiliar. So really the only question is Salt and Sanctuary for you? Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.